There are certain roads that do not look dangerous until you are already too far down them. Not the roads with warning signs everywhere. Those roads are honest. You see them coming. The roads that worry me more are the quiet ones. The ones that begin normally. A turn off a familiar highway. A lane that narrows. Trees pressing closer on both sides. A patch of snow at the edge of the road that seems harmless, because the car is still moving. And if you just keep going, maybe the road will open back up again. Most of the time it does. Most of the time, the wrong road becomes a story you tell later. A bad turn, a nervous laugh. Somebody says, "We are never taking directions from you again," and then everybody goes home. But on February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba County, California, went to a basketball game in Chico. They watched the game. They stopped at a market before it closed. They bought snacks, soda, and cartons of milk. They got back into a turquoise and white Mercury Montego, and they should have gone home. They had every reason to go home. They had families waiting. They had beds in familiar rooms. They had a basketball tournament the next morning. Uniforms already set out. Parents asked to wake them up on time. Instead, their car was found far from the route home. Not a little far. Not one missed turn away. Far up a mountain road in the snow. Deep in the Plumas National Forest. The car still worked. There was gas in the tank. The keys were gone. And the 5 men were gone with them. When the snow finally melted months later, the mystery became worse. 4 of the men would be found dead. 1 would never be found at all. And inside a remote Forest Service trailer, investigators would find food, blankets, heating materials, and signs that at least one of the men may have survived for weeks after the night they vanished. Which leaves the question that has never gone away. If the car worked, why leave it? If shelter was found, why did it not save them? If one man walked away, where did he go? Tonight we are following that road, slowly, carefully. Not as a campfire story, not as a puzzle made for strangers to solve, but as the story of 5 real men, Gary Mathias, Ted Weyer, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, and Bill Sterling. This is the story of the Yuba County Five. The year is 1978. The place is the northern Central Valley of California, where the vast Sacramento Valley meets the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It is a land of contrasts. To the west, the Coast Ranges rise in a long, low line against the horizon. To the east, the Sierra Nevada towers, snow-covered in winter, holding the high country in a long seasonal sleep that lasts from November through May and sometimes beyond. Between them lies the valley, flat and agricultural, where the soil is rich and the growing season is long, where orchards and rice fields stretch out in geometric patterns that change with the seasons, where the air carries the smell of damp earth and growing things. In 1978, this part of California was still very much tied to the land. The towns here had not yet been swallowed by the sprawl that would come in later decades from Sacramento and the Bay Area. They were communities that had grown up around farming, around the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest, around families who had lived in the same houses for generations, around the kind of daily life that does not change quickly. Yuba County sits in that valley, north of Sacramento, along the banks of the Feather River. The county is named after the Yuba River, which flows down from the mountains cold and clear, and joins the Feather near the city of Marysville. Marysville and its neighbor Yuba City are the population centers of the area. They sit across the river from each other, connected by bridges that carry the daily traffic of people going to work, to school, to the grocery store, to the places that make up the rhythm of ordinary life. In 1978, these were not large cities. They were not cities at all in the way that most people think of cities. They were agricultural communities, places where the economy was tied to farming, to orchards, to rice fields, to the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest. The population was smaller than it is today. People knew their neighbors, families had histories that stretched back generations. Community meant something specific, local, and personal. When someone went missing, the whole community felt it. And when 5 men went missing all at once, the void they left behind was enormous, a silence that could be felt in every corner of every street. It was in this setting that 5 men became friends. They were not friends in the way that high school classmates or coworkers often become friends. They were friends because they shared something deeper, something that bound them together in ways that went beyond shared interests or shared history. They all faced cognitive or psychiatric challenges that shaped the way they moved through the world. For each of them, the ordinary tasks of daily life required effort and sometimes required support. Together, those challenges felt smaller. Together, they were stronger. Together, they were a team. Let us meet them, one by one, slowly and carefully, the way you would meet someone you wanted to remember. Gary Mathias was 25 years old at the time of his disappearance. He was born in 1952 in Marysville, California. He grew up in the area, attended local schools, and like many young men of his generation, he joined the United States Army. He was stationed in West Germany in the early 1970s, a time when the Cold War was still very real, when American soldiers served across Europe as a visible presence against the Soviet bloc, when the world felt divided in ways that seem both familiar and distant today. While overseas, Gary began to struggle in ways that he had not struggled before. He developed problems with substance use. And underneath that, something more serious was beginning to surface. He started to experience symptoms of mental illness. The symptoms grew worse over time. The Army diagnosed him with schizophrenia and gave him a psychiatric discharge, sending him home to California with a condition that would shape the rest of his life. When he returned to Marysville, he was not the same person who had left. The years that followed were difficult. Gary experienced psychotic episodes that must have been terrifying for him and for the people who loved him. He was nearly arrested for assault on 2 occasions. He spent time at the Veterans Administration Hospital in nearby Martinez, where doctors worked to stabilize his condition, to find the right combination of medications to bring him back from the edge of the abyss that schizophrenia can create. But by 1978, Gary had made significant progress. He was being treated on an outpatient basis with 2 medications, trifluoperazine and benztropine. Trifluoperazine is an antipsychotic medication. It helps control the hallucinations and delusions that can make schizophrenia so disabling. Benztropine is used to manage the side effects of antipsychotics, the muscle stiffness and restlessness that can make the treatment almost as difficult as the disease. Together, these 2 medications helped keep Gary's symptoms under control while minimizing the physical discomfort that the treatment could cause. His physicians described him as one of their sterling success cases. That phrase is important, sterling success case. It tells us that Gary was not simply surviving. He was not merely getting by. He was improving. He was managing his condition. He was rebuilding his life piece by piece, day by day. His doctors saw real progress in him, and that progress mattered not just to Gary, but to everyone who was rooting for him. He supplemented his Army disability pay by working in his stepfather's gardening business. He had a job, he had responsibilities, he had a routine that gave structure to his days. He could drive, he could socialize. He could function in the world in ways that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier, and he had friends. Gary was close with 4 other men who, like him, lived with challenges that made ordinary life more difficult. Together, they formed a group, a community within the larger community. They played basketball, they watched sports, they spent time together in the way that friends do, in the easy rhythm of shared company. Gary's driver's license made him valuable to the group. He could drive himself and the others where they needed to go. He had independence that some of his friends did not have, but it was Jack Madruga who usually drove. Now let us meet Ted Weher. Ted was 32 years old, the oldest of the 5 men. Ted had an intellectual disability. It affected the way he understood the world, the way he processed information, the way he made decisions. His family knew him as someone who was deeply trusting and literal-minded. He did not always grasp the subtleties that other people took for granted, the unspoken rules that most people learn without being taught. His mother shared 2 stories that have become well known in discussions of this case because they reveal so much about who Ted was as a person. The first story is about a stop sign. Ted once asked why it was necessary to stop at a stop sign. He understood the rule. Certainly, he knew that cars were supposed to stop at intersections where stop signs were posted. But the reasoning behind the rule, the danger of an intersection, the possibility of a collision, the concept of right-of-way and traffic flow, these were abstract to him in a way that they were not to most people. He saw the rule but not the danger that the rule was meant to prevent. He followed instructions but did not always understand why the instructions existed in the first place. The second story is more haunting. in the quiet way that the most revealing stories often are. One night, while Ted was sleeping, a fire started in the ceiling of his bedroom. The ceiling was actively burning. Smoke was filling the room. The fire was spreading, feeding on the wood and insulation above his head. Ted was still in bed, sleeping through the danger. His family had to drag him out of the room, out of the house, to safety, and Ted was upset. He was not upset about the fire. He was not upset about almost dying. He was upset because he was afraid he would be late for work if he did not get enough sleep. That story tells us something essential about Ted Weyer. He was not suspicious of danger. He did not assume that the world could hurt him. He lived in a state of trust, a state of routine, a state where the most important things were showing up on time, doing what was expected, and staying in the pattern that made his life feel understandable and safe. That kind of trust is beautiful. It is also terrifying, because the world does not always protect people who trust it so completely. Ted Weyer saw the world directly, without suspicion, without the protective layer of caution that most people develop over time. That quality made him kind. It made him gentle. It also made him vulnerable. His family also recalled that Ted would eat almost anything he could get his hands on. He loved food with a simple, uncomplicated passion. That detail, too, would become significant later, when investigators tried to understand what happened inside the trailer. Jack Madruga was 30 years old. Jack was an Army veteran like Gary. He had served his country and then returned to civilian life in Yuba City. He lived with his parents, as several of the men did, in the kind of multi-generational household that was common in that time and place. Jack had a driver's license, which made him essential to the group. Of the 5 men, only Jack and Gary could drive. And on the night of February 24th, 1978, Jack was the one behind the wheel. He drove a 1969 Mercury Montego, turquoise and white, 2 doors, a coupe. It was his car, his pride, his most significant possession. He kept it clean. He maintained it carefully. He was particular about it in the way that people are particular about things that matter to them, things that represent their independence and their place in the world. His family said that Jack did not like cold weather. He had never been up into the mountains. He was a valley person through and through, comfortable in the warmth, comfortable on flat roads, comfortable in the world he knew. He would not have driven into the mountains voluntarily, his family believed. It was not the kind of thing he would choose to do. It was not consistent with who he was. Jack Madruga was responsible. He had a car, a license, a sense of duty to his friends. He was the one who got them where they needed to go. He took that role seriously, and his family was certain that Jack would not have let anyone else drive his car. He was that particular about it. That detail, too, would become deeply significant later. Jack Hewitt was 24 years old. He was the youngest of the 5. Jack was quiet. He was described by his brother as someone who hated using the telephone. If someone called for Jack, his brother would answer the call and relay the message, because Jack simply did not want to talk on the phone. It made him uncomfortable. It was not his way of connecting with people. Instead, Jack connected through presence. He was often seen with Ted Weyer. The 2 of them were close, closer than any other pair in the group. Where Ted went, Jack often followed. Where Jack was, Ted was usually nearby. They were a pair within the larger group, 2 friends who understood each other in a way that perhaps no one else could. That detail would become important later. When the Brownsville store clerk described seeing 2 men together, one of whom she believed to be Ted, the other Jack, Jack Hewitt lived with his parents. His life was simple, structured, and centered on his family and his friends. He was not a leader in the group, but he was a steady presence, loyal and constant, the kind of friend who shows up without needing to be asked. Bill Sterling was 29 years old. Bill was described in the language of the time as a slow learner. That term would not be used today, but in 1978, it was how people understood him. He had cognitive challenges that made learning and processing information more difficult for him than for other people his age. His father had once taken him fishing near the area where the Mercury would later be found, in the foothills of Plumas National Forest. Bill had not enjoyed it. He did not like being in the mountains. He stayed home when his father took later trips there, perfectly content to remain in the valley where he felt comfortable and safe. Bill Sterling had no interest in the place where he would eventually die. These 5 men were not strangers to one another. They were not casual acquaintances who happened to spend time together. They were a group, a unit, a team in the truest sense of the word. They played basketball together on a team called the Gateway Gators. The Gateway Gators were part of a local program supported by the community, a program designed for people with disabilities. The team gave the men a structure, a purpose, a shared identity. They practiced together. They played games. They cheered for one another. They were teammates in every sense. Their families said that when the five got together, it was almost always to do something related to sports. Either they were playing a game or they were watching one. That was the bond that held them together. That was the language they shared, the common ground where all five of them felt confident and able. In late February of 1978, the Gateway Gators were preparing for something important. A week-long Special Olympics tournament was scheduled to begin on Saturday, February 25. The winners would receive a free week in Los Angeles, a major prize, a chance to travel, to compete, to be recognized for their abilities rather than their disabilities. The men had been looking forward to it. They had been preparing. The night before the tournament, some of them laid out their uniforms. Some asked their parents to wake them up on time. They were ready, they were excited, they were focused. But the night before the tournament, they decided to do something else first. They decided to drive north to Chico to watch a college basketball game between the UC Davis Aggies and the Chico State Wildcats. Let us pause here for a moment. This decision to go watch a game the night before their own tournament seems simple. It seems like the kind of thing that friends do together. They had the evening free. There was a game happening nearby. Why not go? That decision has been analyzed, questioned, and puzzled over for more than 40 years, not because it was unusual, but because of what followed. Because after the game, after the snacks, after the drive north, something happened that took the five men off course and into a mystery that has never been resolved. So let us walk through that night, step by step, as carefully as we can. The date is Friday, February 24th, 1978. Chico State University, known today as California State University. Chico was hosting a basketball game. The UC Davis Aggies were the visiting team. The Chico State Wildcats were the home team. Chico is about 50 miles north of Marysville and Yuba City. It is a college town, larger than the cities the five men called home, but still small enough to feel familiar. The campus sits in the northern Sacramento Valley, not far from where the valley gives way to the foothills. The streets are lined with trees, oak and maple and sycamore. The university gives the town its energy and its identity. On a Friday night in February, Chico would have been alive with the energy of a weekend beginning. Students moving between dorms and apartments. The sounds of music and conversation drifting from open windows. The smell of food from restaurants near campus. It was the kind of evening that felt ordinary to everyone who lived there. The kind of evening that would only become remarkable in retrospect. The five men decided to drive up for the game. Jack Madruga drove. He was behind the wheel of his turquoise and white Mercury Montego. The car had two doors, which meant the seating was a little tight for five grown men. But they were used to that. They piled in together as they always did, adjusting themselves to fit, making room for each other. They arrived at the Chico State campus. They found parking. They went into the gymnasium. They watched the game. UC Davis won, that much is known. Beyond that, the details of the game itself have faded from the record. What matters is that the men were there in Chico on a Friday night doing exactly what they love to do. Watching sports, being together, enjoying a shared experience. After the game, they got back in the Mercury and drove a short distance to a place called Bears Market. Bears Market was a small grocery store in downtown Chico. It was the kind of neighborhood market where local people shopped. Not a chain, not a supermarket, just a familiar store with familiar shelves and a familiar closing time. The kind of place that has been part of the community for years. The men went inside and bought snacks. They bought sodas. They bought cartons of milk. They bought food that would later be found partially consumed inside the car when it was discovered days later. The clerk who was working that night remembered the group. She remembered them because she was annoyed. It was almost 10 o'clock, the store's closing time. She was ready to lock up. She was ready to go home after a long shift. And then this group of five men walked in, browsing, picking items, taking their time, apparently unaware that they were delaying her evening. She remembered being frustrated by the delay. That frustration, that small moment of annoyance, is the reason we know the men were at Bears Market shortly before 10 o'clock on the night of February 24, 1978. It is the last confirmed sighting of all 5 men together. After the purchase, the men should have driven south. Home was south. The Special Olympics tournament was the next morning, south. Everything they needed to do, everything they had prepared for, everything they were looking forward to, required them to go south. But they did not go south. Instead, they went north, then east, up into the mountains. Why? That question has never been answered. The most commonly accepted theory is that the men intended to visit someone, or they made a wrong turn, or some combination of both. Gary Matthias had friends in the small town of Forbestown, which lies east of Oroville in the foothills. It is possible that the men decided to make a detour, to visit those friends before heading home, to extend the evening a little longer. If they did, they may have taken a wrong turn near Oroville, a wrong turn that put them onto a road that led deeper into the mountains rather than back toward the valley, a wrong turn that seemed minor at first but became more and more significant with every mile they traveled. That road was Oroville-Quincy Road. It winds up into the Sierra Nevada foothills, through Plumas National Forest, climbing to elevations where snow is common in the winter months. It is a rural road, unpaved in parts, winding, remote, lined with trees that close in on both sides. It is not a road that leads anywhere quickly. It is a road that takes you into the forest, into the quiet, into the cold. The Mercury Montego was found on that road, 70 miles from Chico, at an elevation of about 4,400 feet. That meant that the men, after leaving Bears Market, had driven more than 70 miles in the wrong direction. They had climbed into the mountains on a winter night, leaving the familiar flatlands behind. They had driven up a dirt road that was in places rough and uneven, a road that challenged the undercarriage of any car that traveled it, and they had done all of this wearing only light coats. The temperature at that elevation on a February night in the Sierra Nevada would have been far below freezing. It would have been far colder than anything the men were used to in the valley, where winter temperatures rarely drop below the 40s. They were not dressed for the cold. They were dressed for a basketball game in a heated gymnasium, followed by a short drive home in a heated car. They were not prepared to be where they ended up. The families did not know any of this on the morning of Saturday, February 25. When the men did not come home, the families waited. They had expected them back the night before. Clothes had been laid out. Wake-up times had been arranged. The Special Olympics tournament was scheduled to begin. The men did not arrive. The morning passed. The afternoon came. No calls, no messages, no sign of the 5 men anywhere. The families grew concerned. Then they grew worried. Then they called the police. The initial search focused on the route between Chico and Yuba City. Investigators checked roads, hospitals, and friends' houses. There was no sign of the men. No one had seen them after Bears Market. They seemed to have vanished into thin air. For several days, the case seemed to have no leads at all. But then a Plumas National Forest ranger came forward with information that would change everything. He had been driving along Oroville-Quincy Road on Saturday, February 25, the day after the men disappeared. He had seen a turquoise and white Mercury Montego parked on the side of the road in a remote area, stuck in snow. At the time, he had not thought it was unusual. People often drove up that road on winter weekends to go cross-country skiing. An abandoned car on a mountain road was not necessarily a sign of trouble. He noted it and moved on, continuing his patrol. But when he saw the missing persons bulletin, he recognized the car. He led deputies to it on February 28, 1978. The car was found on a high mountain dirt road in Plumas National Forest. It was far from any direct route to Yuba City or Marysville. It was far from anywhere the 5 men had any reason to be. The car was stuck in snow, but the snow was not very deep. Investigators examined the scene and concluded that 5 healthy young men should have been able to push the car out without much difficulty. The wheels had spun, leaving marks in the snow, but the car was not deeply embedded. It might have taken only a few minutes of effort to free it. Inside the car, there were clear signs of the men. Empty wrappers and containers from the food and drinks they had bought at Bears Market were scattered on the seats and floor. Programs from the basketball game they had attended were also present. A neatly folded road map of California sat in the car. These items suggested that the men had been in the car between the time they were last seen and the time it was abandoned. They had eaten the snacks. They had kept the programs as souvenirs. The map was folded neatly, not crumpled or discarded, suggesting it had not been used in panic. If they had been lost and desperately trying to find their way, the map might have been unfolded, refolded, studied under a dim dome light. Instead, it sat as if it had never been needed. The car keys were missing. At first, this fact suggested a simple explanation. Perhaps the car had broken down, perhaps the men had left to find help, intending to return with assistance. The missing keys could mean they planned to come back. But when police tried to start the car, it started immediately. The engine turned over smoothly. The fuel gauge showed the tank was 1/4 full of gasoline. There was nothing wrong with the Mercury Montego. It was in perfect working order. The car was towed back to the station for a more thorough examination. What investigators found only deepened the mystery. The undercarriage of the Mercury had no dents, no gouges, no scratches, not even on the muffler, which hung low beneath the car and would have been the first part to scrape against rocks or ruts in the road. This was remarkable because the road leading to where the car was found was rough. It had bumps, ruts, potholes, and uneven surfaces. A car driven up that road would normally show signs of contact. The undercarriage would have scraped against rocks, branches, and frozen ground. There would be scratches, dents, evidence of the rough passage, but the Mercury was clean underneath, as if it had never touched the road at all. There were two possible explanations. Either the driver had been extremely careful, navigating around every obstacle with unusual precision, threading the car through hazards that would have damaged any other vehicle. Or the driver was someone who knew the road well, someone who knew exactly where the hazards were and how to avoid them, someone who had driven that road many times before. Jack Madruga, whose car it was not known to have any familiarity with that road. His family said he had never been up into the mountains. He did not know that road. And his family also said that Jack would not have let someone else drive his car. He was particular about it. He did not let other people behind the wheel. So if Jack was driving as his family believed, how was the undercarriage so clean? If someone else was driving, who was it, and why? There were other details that did not fit the picture of a simple breakdown and walk for help. The car was unlocked when it was found. One window was rolled down. Jack Madruga's family said it was not like him to leave his car unsecured. He was careful with his belongings. He locked his doors. He rolled up his windows. Leaving a car unlocked with a window down was simply not something he would do. The missing keys were another puzzle. If the men left the car intending to return, they would have taken the keys to keep them safe. If they left in a hurry, they might have left the keys behind. But if they left because something forced them out or because they were scared, the keys would still be there. They were not. The car could be started without the keys, as investigators demonstrated by hot wiring it. But the fact that the keys were gone suggested that someone took them. Whether that someone was one of the 5 men or someone else entirely is a question that has never been answered. The search of the surrounding area began immediately after the car was discovered, but the weather was not cooperative. A severe snowstorm swept through the region, dumping more snow on the already snow-covered ground. The conditions became dangerous for searchers. 2 days after the car was found, searchers in snowcats, tracked vehicles designed for travel in deep snow, nearly became lost themselves in the whiteout conditions. Further search efforts were called off. The families waited, and as they waited, they did everything they could to keep the case in the public eye. They distributed flyers with photographs and descriptions of the 5 men. They spoke to every reporter who would listen. They prayed, they hoped. They tried not to let themselves imagine the worst. The case appeared in newspapers across California. The Sacramento Bee ran articles. The Los Angeles Times sent reporters to cover the story. Headlines asked what had happened to the 5 missing men. The families offered a reward of $1,215, which would be roughly $6,000 in today's money, a significant sum for working families, and then a witness stepped forward. His name was Joseph Shans. He was a resident of Sacramento. He had a story to tell, a story that would become one of the most discussed and debated elements of the Yuba County Five case. Joseph Shans told police that he had driven up to the Plumas National Forest area on the evening of February 24, 1978. He owned a cabin in the mountains and wanted to check the snowpack before a planned weekend ski trip with his family. At around 5:30 in the evening, about 150 feet from where the Mercury Montego would later be found, Shans got his own car stuck in the snow while trying to free his car. Shans began to feel unwell. He realized he was experiencing the early symptoms of a heart attack. He stopped trying to free the car and got back inside, keeping the engine running to stay warm. The pain worsened. For 6 long hours, Shans lay in his car suffering, the cold seeping in around him, the pain in his chest coming and going in waves. He was alone in the dark, in the cold, in the silence of the forest, with nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the occasional gust of wind against the windows. It must have been a terrifying experience to be trapped in that remote place, unable to move, unable to help yourself, unsure whether anyone would come. Then, at around 11:30 at night, he saw headlights behind him. A car had pulled up and parked behind his. The headlights were on, cutting through the falling snow. Shans could see a group of people around the car. He thought one of them appeared to be a woman holding a baby. He called out for help. The people stopped talking. They turned off their headlights. They went silent. Later, Shans saw more lights behind him, this time flashlights moving in the darkness. He called out again. The flashlights went out. After that, Shans recalled seeing a pickup truck briefly park about 20 feet behind him, and then continue down the road. But he later told police that he could not be sure of this memory, because by that point he was almost delirious from pain and fear. His car eventually ran out of fuel in the early morning hours. As the pain subsided, Shans was able to walk 8 miles down the road to a lodge. The manager of the lodge drove him home, and on the way they passed the abandoned Mercury Montego at the place where Shans had heard the voices and seen the lights go dark. Doctors later confirmed that Joseph Shans had experienced a mild heart attack. The question that has haunted investigators and true crime enthusiasts ever since is whether the people that Shans saw and heard that night were the 5 missing men. The location matches, the timeline matches. The Mercury would have been in the area, either already stuck or about to become stuck, at the same time that Shans was there. If the men were there and they heard a voice calling for help from the darkness, and they responded by going silent and turning off their lights, what does that mean? Were they afraid? Were they confused? Did they not understand that the voice was asking for help? Ted Whiter's mother, when she heard this story, said that ignoring someone's pleas for help was not like her son. She remembered how Ted and Bill Sterling had once helped someone they knew get to a hospital after overdosing on Valium. They were not the kind of people who would refuse to help someone in distress, but that assumes the men heard the voice, that they understood what was happening, that they were capable of responding in a way that made sense in that terrifying moment. We cannot know any of that. It is possible that the men were afraid of the voice. They were in a strange place, in the dark, in the cold, far from home. A voice calling from the darkness might have seemed threatening rather than desperate. They may have believed that staying quiet and invisible was the safest response. It is possible that the men did not hear the voice at all. The wind, the snow, the distance, the closed windows of the car, the sound of their own engine. Sound carries differently in snow, and a voice can be swallowed by the cold and the silence. It is possible that the people Shans saw were not the 5 missing men at all, but some other group entirely, someone else passing through that remote area on that remote night. The story of Joseph Shans is one of the most haunting elements of the Yuba County Five case because it suggests proximity. It suggests that the men were close to help, close to being found, close to survival, a voice in the dark, a light going out, a chance that was missed. But it is also a story that cannot be verified. It is a single witness account given by a man who was in severe pain, who later admitted that parts of his memory were uncertain. We can hold it as possible. We cannot hold it as proven. The snow continued to fall. Weeks passed. Then another sighting emerged. On March 3, 1978, about a week after the disappearance, a woman who worked at a store in the small town of Brownsville contacted the police. Brownsville is located about 30 miles from where the Mercury Montego was found. It is a tiny community in the foothills, the kind of place where strangers stand out, where everyone notices when someone new passes through. There is no reason for anyone to pass through Brownsville unless they are heading deeper into the mountains or coming back out. The woman told deputies that 4 men matching the descriptions of the missing men had stopped at her store the day after the basketball game. She said they arrived in a red pickup truck, a different vehicle from the Mercury that the men had been driving. She said she immediately realized the men were not from the area. She used the phrase big eyes and facial expressions to describe what made them seem different to her. She identified 2 of the men as Jack Hewitt and Bill Sterling, whom she had seen standing outside in a telephone booth. 2 other men had gone inside the store. The store owner also spoke with investigators. He said he believed the 2 men who entered the store were Ted Waher and Jack Hewitt. He recalled that they bought burritos, chocolate milk, and soft drinks. The police described the woman as a credible witness. They took her account seriously. Ted Waher's brother said that the idea of the men driving to Brownsville in a different car on the day after the game, apparently unaware or unconcerned about the missed Special Olympics tournament, seemed completely out of character. But he also noted that the store owner's description of their behavior seemed consistent with Ted and Jack. Ted, he said, would eat anything he could get his hands on, and Ted was often accompanied by Jack Hewitt more than by any of the other 4. Jack Hewitt's brother added that Jack hated using telephones, so if Jack was seen standing at a telephone booth outside a store, that fit with who he was. He would let others go inside while he stood by the phone, not using it, just waiting. That small detail, a man standing silently by a telephone, seems so ordinary. But in the context of this case, it becomes another piece of evidence, another reason to believe that the Brownsville sighting may have been real. The Brownsville sighting added a layer of complexity to the case. If the sighting was accurate, then at least 4 of the men were still alive on February 25. They had somehow obtained a different vehicle, a red pickup truck. They were still in the foothills, still heading deeper into the mountains rather than back toward the valley. And Gary Mathias was not mentioned as part of the sighting. If 4 men were seen but Gary was not among them, where was he? Had Gary already become separated from the group? Was he somewhere else? Had he been left behind, or had he left on his own? Was he lost, injured, or already dead? We do not know. The Brownsville sighting remains one of the most tantalizing and frustrating pieces of the Yuba County Five puzzle. It suggests that the men survived the first night. It suggests they were mobile, active, and moving through the area. It suggests they had help from someone with a red pickup truck. But it does not explain why they did not call home. It does not explain why they did not return to the valley. It does not explain why they kept moving away from safety, deeper into the cold and the isolation, and the red pickup truck has never been identified. The months between February and June of 1978 were a time of waiting. The families held on to hope. They distributed flyers. They spoke to reporters. They prayed. They offered a reward. They did everything they could think of to bring attention to the case, but the snow in the mountains did not melt quickly. Large areas of Pluma's National Forest remained inaccessible through the late winter and early spring. The search could not resume in earnest until the snow receded, until the ground was visible again, until the truth that was buried under drifts could finally be uncovered. The truth was buried under drifts, waiting for the thaw. In June, the snow finally melted, and the bodies began to appear. On June 4, 1978, a group of motorcyclists was riding through the Plumas National Forest, enjoying the first days of accessible mountain roads after the long winter. They came to a campsite where a trailer owned by the United States Forest Service was located. The trailer was about 19.4 miles from where the Mercury Montego had been found. The front window of the trailer was broken. When the motorcyclists opened the door, they were met by a smell that told them immediately that something terrible had happened inside. They found the body of Ted Waher. The discovery set off a larger search of the area. Searchers returned to Plumas National Forest, following the road between the trailer and the location where the Mercury had been abandoned, looking for any sign of the other men. On June 5th, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were discovered on opposite sides of the road, about 11.4 miles from where the car had been found. Jack Madruga's body had been partially consumed by scavenging animals that had found him in the forest. Only bones remained of Bill Sterling, scattered over a small area, picked clean by the creatures of the woods. Autopsies determined that both men had died of hypothermia. the slow creeping cold that first numbs and then silences. Deputies who examined the scene speculated about what had happened. They believed that one of the men had likely given in to the need to sleep that comes with the final stages of hypothermia, while the other stayed by his side and died the same way. They died together, not alone, but together was not enough to save them. 2 days later, on June 7th, Jack Whit's father was part of a search party. He was looking for his son. He found what remained of him. Jack Whit's backbone was discovered under a manzanita bush about 2 miles northeast of the trailer. His shoes and jeans were found nearby, helping to identify the body. The next day, a skull was discovered by a deputy sheriff about 300 feet from the bush. Dental records confirmed it was Jack Hewitt. His death was also attributed to hypothermia. 4 of the 5 men had been found. All had died from exposure to cold. All had been within a range of roughly 20 miles from the abandoned car. But Gary Mathias was not among them. Gary Mathias has never been found. His photograph was distributed to mental institutions all across California. The theory was that he might have wandered, disoriented and without his medication, and ended up in a hospital or shelter somewhere, unable to give his name or explain who he was. But no trace of him has ever been located. He remains missing to this day. More than 40 years later, his fate is still unknown. The discovery of the bodies answered the basic question of what happened to 4 of the 5 men. They died of hypothermia in the mountains. But that answer only raised more questions. Why were they in the mountains? Why did they leave the car? Why did they walk so far in the wrong direction? And what happened inside the trailer where Ted Waher was found? Because the trailer, more than any other piece of evidence, is where the Yuba County Five case becomes truly strange. Let us describe the trailer carefully. It was a Forest Service trailer located at a campsite off the road. It was intended for use by forest personnel, not by the general public. It was locked, secured against the winter. The men had broken in through the front window. Inside, Ted Waher was found on a bed. He had been wrapped in 8 sheets, including over his head. An autopsy showed that he had died of a combination of starvation and hypothermia. Ted Waher had lost nearly half his body weight. He had weighed around 200 pounds at the time of his disappearance. By the time he died, he had wasted away to little more than 100 pounds, his body consuming itself for fuel as the weeks passed. The growth of his beard suggested that he had lived for slightly more than 3 months from his last shave. That means Ted Waher may have survived in that trailer from late February until early June. He may have been alive for more than 100 days after the disappearance. His feet were badly frostbitten, almost gangrenous, the tissue dead from prolonged exposure to cold. On a table beside the bed, investigators found his personal effects. His wallet was there, with cash still inside, untouched. A nickel ring with the name Ted engraved on it, a gold necklace he always wore. A partially melted candle that had provided some small light in the darkness. Also on the table was a gold watch, missing its crystal, its face exposed. Ted's family said the watch did not belong to him. Who did it belong to? We do not know. Now, here is what makes the trailer so difficult to understand, so frustrating, so heartbreaking. The trailer had a fireplace. It had not been used. There were matches nearby, ready to strike. There were paperback novels that could have been used as kindling to start a fire. The fire had never been lit. Heavy forestry clothing was stored in the trailer. Thick jackets and pants designed for the cold. It had not been worn. Outside the trailer, there was a storage shed containing 3 dozen cans of C rations, military-style field rations that could be opened and eaten cold. These had been opened and their contents consumed. Someone, presumably Ted or Gary, had been eating them, surviving on them. But in the same shed, there was a locker holding an even greater assortment of dehydrated food, freeze-dried meals that could have provided far more sustenance. This food could have fed all 5 men for a year if necessary. The locker had never been opened. The food sat there, untouched. Another shed held a butane tank with a valve that, if opened, would have fed the trailer's heating system. The valve had not been opened. The heat was available. It was never used. Ted Waher starved to death inside a building that contained food, heat, and warm clothing. That is the central paradox of the trailer. He had access to everything he needed to survive, and he did not use it. How is that possible? Ted's family offered one explanation. They said that Ted lacked common sense as a result of his cognitive disability. He may not have understood how to use the fireplace. He may not have realized that the butane valve would provide heat. He may not have recognized that the dehydrated food in the locker was meant to be eaten. That is possible, but Ted was not alone in the trailer, at least not at first. Gary Mathias' tennis sneakers were found inside the trailer. The C-ration cans had been opened with a P38 can opener, a specific type of military issue can opener. Only Gary Mathias and Jack Madruga would have been familiar with that tool from their service in the Army. That tells us that at least one of the two veterans was present at the trailer. The sheets covering Ted's body suggested that another person had been with him at or near the time of his death. Ted's gangrenous feet would have caused too much pain for him to have pulled the sheets over his own body. Someone else must have covered him. That someone was likely Gary Mathias. So the picture that emerges from the trailer is this. Gary Mathias survived the long walk through the snow. He reached the trailer. He found Ted there, or Ted was already there. However it happened, they were together. They stayed together. They ate the C-rations, opening them with the P38 that Gary or Jack had carried. They did not light the fire. They did not use the butane heater. They did not open the locker of dehydrated food. Weeks passed. Ted grew weaker. His feet froze, the tissue dying from the cold. He lost weight, his body wasting away as the days crawled by. Gary stayed with him, and then, after Ted died, Gary Mathias put his own sneakers on Ted's feet, or left his sneakers behind for some other reason that we cannot understand. He took Ted's shoes, or went barefoot and walked away into the forest. He was never seen again. Why did Gary not light the fire? Why did he not open the butane valve? Why did he not dress Ted in the warm clothing stored nearby? Why did he not open the locker of food that could have kept them both alive? These questions have no easy answers. They are the questions that have haunted this case for more than 40 years. One possibility is that Gary's mental health deteriorated after he stopped taking his medication. His schizophrenia was managed by prescription drugs. If he forgot to bring his medication, or ran out, or lost it during the walk through the snow, he may have begun to experience symptoms. He may have become paranoid. He may have become confused. He may have lost the ability to reason clearly, to problem solve, to understand what needed to be done. Paranoia could explain why the fire was not lit. Gary may have believed that smoke from the chimney would attract attention. He may have believed that someone would find them, that they would be punished for breaking into the trailer, that staying hidden was more important than staying warm. Confusion could explain why the food locker was not opened. Gary may not have understood what it contained. He may have been too overwhelmed to explore. He may have been experiencing hallucinations or delusions that made the world around him feel threatening and unreal. Another possibility is that the men did not believe they had the right to use the supplies. They had broken into a government building. They may have been afraid of being arrested for burglary or theft. They may have believed that using the food, the fire, or the heating fuel would make their crime worse, would add to their punishment when they were eventually caught. This fear of getting in trouble, even when survival is at stake, may sound unlikely to some people. But for individuals with cognitive disabilities, for individuals who have been taught to follow rules, for individuals who are used to being told what to do, that fear can be very real. Ted Waher, who was afraid of being late for work while his bedroom ceiling was actively burning, may have been afraid of the consequences of using someone else's property. Gary Mathias, who had been through the military, who had been through psychiatric treatment, who had nearly been arrested before, may have been afraid of what would happen if he was caught. That fear may have killed them. A third possibility, one that is darker and more speculative, is that someone else was present at the trailer, someone who prevented the men from using the supplies. Someone who may have been connected to the mysterious figures that Joseph Sean saw that night on the mountain road. This theory suggests that the Yuba County Five were not simply lost. It suggests that they encountered someone, or were being directed by someone, and that this person had reasons for keeping them hidden, for keeping them quiet, for keeping them from using the resources around them. Under this theory, the bodies found in the mountains may not tell the full story. The missing keys, the clean undercarriage, the strange behavior at the trailer, the complete disappearance of Gary Mathias, all of these could be signs of something more than a tragic accident, but it is important to be clear. There is no evidence of a specific suspect. There is no evidence that a crime was committed by another person. The The theory of foul play is just that, a theory. It is one way to explain the facts that do not fit the simpler explanation. The simpler explanation is this: the men made a wrong turn. They got stuck, they left the car, and then they made a decision that may have sealed their fate. Instead of going back the way they came, back toward the lodge that Joseph Shones would later reach, they chose to continue forward along the road in the direction they were originally headed. Police believe there was a reason for this. The day before the men went missing, a Forest Service snowcat had traveled along that road, heading toward the trailer to clear snow off the roof so it would not collapse. The snowcat had left tracks, deep impressions in the snow that would have been clearly visible. The men, walking through snowdrifts that were 4 to 6 feet high, may have decided to follow those tracks, believing that wherever the large vehicle had gone, shelter might be nearby. They followed the tracks through the deep snow. It was a logical decision. It was the kind of decision that anyone might make in their situation. But the tracks led them away from the road that would have taken them back to safety, and deeper into the frozen forest. Along the way, Madruga and Sterling died of hypothermia, about halfway through the long walk to the trailer. Hewitt died soon after. Matthias and Weyer reached the trailer. They survived for weeks or months but were unable or unwilling to use the resources available. Weyer died. Matthias, distraught, confused, or ill, walked away and perished somewhere in the forest where his remains have never been found. That explanation accounts for many of the facts, but not all of them. It does not explain the missing keys. It does not explain the clean undercarriage. It does not explain why the men, who were expected home and had a tournament the next morning, chose to drive into the mountains at all. It does not explain the red pickup truck at the Brownsville store. It does not explain the voices and lights that Joseph Shones saw go dark. It does not explain the gold watch that did not belong to Ted Weyer. It does not explain why Gary Matthias, who had responded well to treatment and was considered a success story by his doctors, would lead his friends into danger or fail to help them survive. And it does not explain how a man can vanish so completely that no trace of him has ever been found, not even after more than 40 years of searching. These are the questions that keep the Yuba County Five case alive in public memory. Over the decades, the case has been revisited by journalists, podcasters, documentary filmmakers, and online communities. New theories have emerged, old facts have been re-examined, but no breakthrough has occurred. One theory that has persisted over the years involves the possibility of a cult or religious group operating in the area. Some have speculated that the men may have encountered people living in the forest who were isolated from society, people who may have been dangerous. There have been stories of a group living in the Plumas National Forest at that time, though no concrete evidence has ever connected them to the case. Another theory focuses on the possibility that the men were the victims of a crime, that someone lured them up the mountain or forced them off the road. The clean undercarriage, the missing keys, the unlocked car with the window down, the strange behavior of the people that Shones encountered, all of these could point to the presence of a third party, someone who was with the men that night and whose identity has never been discovered. But again, there is no evidence of a specific suspect. There is no evidence that a crime was committed. These are theories, not facts. What we know for certain is more limited. We know that 5 men drove to Chico on February 24, 1978. We know they bought snacks at Bears Market. We know their car was found on a remote mountain road. We know 4 of their bodies were discovered months later. We know that one of them, Gary Matthias, has never been found. We know that the trailer where Ted Weyer died contained food, heat, and warm clothing that were not used. We know that the car keys were missing, the undercarriage was clean, and the car was unlocked with a window down. And we know that Joseph Shones reported seeing and hearing people who went silent when he called for help. Beyond that, everything else is interpretation. Gary Matthias remains on missing person databases. His photograph, taken when he was 25 years old, still circulates online. A young man in his army uniform looking forward, looking hopeful, looking like someone who had turned a corner in his life. He is still missing. The families who lived through this case did not receive the closure they deserved. Ted Weyer's mother died without knowing the full truth of what happened to her son. She carried the image of him in that trailer, covered in sheets, surrounded by food he did not eat, for the rest of her life. Jack Madruga's parents had to accept that their son, who hated cold weather and had never been to the mountains, died of hypothermia in the snow. Bill Sterling's father had to bury his son in a place Bill had not wanted to visit. Jack Huet's father was the one who found his son's remains beneath a bush, a memory that must have haunted him every day for the rest of his life. And Gary Mathias' family never had a grave to visit. No place to leave flowers, no final confirmation, no answer to the question that must have followed them every day, where is he? They lived with ambiguity. They lived with questions that no one could answer. They lived with the knowledge that their son, their brother, their friend had disappeared into the cold and never come back. This is what makes the Yuba County Five case different from many unsolved mysteries. It is not only the strangeness of the facts, it is not only the puzzle of the missing keys and the clean undercarriage and the uneaten food, it is the human cost. For every detail that puzzles true crime enthusiasts, there is a family who has had to carry that detail as a weight, as a burden, as a question they could never answer. The missing keys are not just a clue. They are a question that Jack Madruga's parents could never answer, a question they carried to their graves. The broken window in the trailer is not just an image. It is the place where Ted Wyer's last chance at survival was located, the last door that might have opened to save him. The shoes that Gary Mathias left behind are not just an object. They are the last known trace of a man who has not been seen since 1978, the last physical evidence that he was ever there. We should remember that as we move through the details of this case. We are not solving a puzzle. We are bearing witness to a tragedy. The case of the Yuba County Five has been called many things over the years: unsolvable, inexplicable, the American Dyatlov Pass. But at its heart, it is simply a story about 5 men who did not come home. 5 men who had names. 5 men who had families. 5 men who had a basketball game the next morning, uniforms they had laid out, parents they had asked to wake them on time. They were not just a mystery, they were people. Gary Mathias was 25. He had fought through the hardest period of his mental illness and was being described by his doctors as a success story. He worked in his stepfather's gardening business. He was a teammate. He was a friend. He was a son. He disappeared into the mountains of Plumas National Forest and has never been found. Ted Wyher was 32. He saw the world in a direct and trusting way. He asked questions that revealed how differently his mind worked. He loved food. He loved his friends. He would have helped someone who called out in the dark. He died of starvation and hypothermia inside a trailer that contained food, clothing, and heat. Jack Madruga was 30. He kept his car clean. He did not like the cold. He was the driver, the one with the license and the responsibility. He would not have left his car unlocked willingly. He died of hypothermia on a road he never intended to travel. Jack Hewitt was 24. He was quiet. He hated the telephone. He stayed close to Ted, the two of them a pair within the larger group. He followed where his friend led. His father found what remained of him beneath a bush. Bill Sterling was 29. He had tried the mountains once and decided he did not like them. He stayed home when his father went back. He never wanted to be on that road. He died beside his friend, their bodies found on opposite sides of the road, together in their final moments. These are the 5 men of the Yuba County Five. Their story has no neat ending. There is no moment when a detective reveals the full truth. There is no confession, no trial, no conviction, no final explanation that makes everything fall into place. There is only the known timeline, the contradictory evidence, the theories that compete for plausibility, and the absence at the center of it all. Gary Mathias is still missing. The case is still open. The families who lived through it have carried the weight for decades, and many of them have passed away without receiving the answers they deserved. Before we let the rain carry the story toward its close, it is worth slowing down one more time and looking again at the parts of the case that often pass too quickly. Because the Yuba County Five is not a case that can be understood only by listing events in order. The order matters, of course. The basketball game, Bears Market, the wrong road, the abandoned car, the search, the sightings, the trailer, the bodies, the missing man. Those are the markers, they are the points on the map. But the emotional truth of the case lives between those points, in the choices that cannot be reconstructed, in the silences where a witness account ends, in the ordinary habits of five men whose lives were interrupted by a night that no one has ever been able to explain. So we can return to the beginning, not to repeat it, but to feel the shape of it more clearly. The five men were not experienced mountain travelers. That is one of the facts that matters most. They were valley men. Their lives were oriented toward Marysville, Yuba City, Chico, the familiar roads of the Sacramento Valley, the places where their families lived, where their basketball team practiced, where their routines made sense. A valley road at night is different from a mountain road at night. In the valley, even when the fields are dark, the world remains readable. The land is flat. Roads run in straighter lines. There are farmhouses, intersections, service stations, lights in the distance, towns that appear before long. A wrong turn can usually be corrected. A person who feels uneasy can keep driving and eventually find a sign, a town, a phone, a human being. In the mountains, especially in winter, the world narrows. The road curves. The trees close in. Snow changes the shape of the land. Darkness becomes deeper because there are fewer lights to break it. Distances feel longer. Sounds are muffled. A person can drive for miles and see nothing but the next stretch of road, the next bend, the next wall of trees. For someone used to the valley, that kind of environment can feel disorienting very quickly. That does not prove that the men were lost. It does not prove that they were afraid, but it helps us understand how a mistake, if there was a mistake, could become dangerous. A wrong turn near a city is an inconvenience. A wrong turn into the Sierra Nevada in February can become a matter of life and death. And the men were not dressed for life and death. They had light coats. They had clothes suited for a basketball game and a drive home. They did not have snow boots, heavy gloves, extra blankets, sleeping bags, emergency food, or the kind of survival equipment someone might carry when intentionally heading into high country. They had snacks from Bear's Market. They had sodas and milk. They had the ordinary things a person buys after a game, not the things a person brings to survive the night outdoors. That contrast is part of the heartbreak. Nothing about the early part of the evening suggests danger. Five friends went to a basketball game. They watched UC Davis win. They bought food and drinks. They delayed a clerk who wanted to close the store. They were last seen doing something normal, and then the story turns. It turns without warning, without explanation, without the kind of clear event that would make everything afterward understandable. There was no known argument at the game, no confirmed confrontation at the market, no verified report that someone forced them into the mountains, no note, no phone call, no survivor. Only the car, days later waiting in the snow. The car has always been the first object people imagine when they hear this case. The turquoise and white Mercury Montego sitting on Oroville Quincy Road far from home. It is such a strong image because it feels like a question made physical. Why here? Why this road? Why this far? Why leave it? A car is usually safety. In winter, especially, a car is shelter. It has a roof. It has seats. It may have heat if there is gasoline and the engine runs. It is easier to find than five people walking through trees. It is a signal to searchers. It is proof that someone was there. So when investigators found the Mercury and discovered it still had gas, still started, and was not badly stuck, the decision to leave it became one of the central mysteries. If the men stayed inside the car, they might have survived until help came. If they pushed the car, they might have freed it. If they walked back the way they came, they might have reached lower ground. But we have to be careful with sentences like that. They might have. We can say those things from a warm room from many decades later, with the benefit of knowing where the car was found, where the bodies were found, what supplies were in the trailer, what the weather did, and how the search unfolded. They did not have that knowledge. They had darkness, cold, confusion, snow, fear, perhaps. A road that did not look familiar. A car that seemed stuck. Maybe a sense that help had to be somewhere ahead. In survival situations, people do not always choose the option that later seems obvious. Cold changes thinking. Stress changes thinking. Darkness changes thinking. And the five men already moved through the world with vulnerabilities that made crisis harder to navigate. That is not a judgment. It is simply part of the truth. If Gary was stable on medication, what happened if he did not have access to it for days or weeks? If Ted relied on rules and routine, how did he interpret a situation with no clear rules? If Jack Madruga did not know the mountains and hated cold weather, what did he feel as the car climbed higher and higher? If Jack Hewitt avoided the telephone and followed Ted closely, what did he do when the group had to decide whether to stay or walk? If Bill Sterling already knew he disliked that part of the foothills, what did it mean for him to find himself there at night, in snow, with no warm gear? These questions cannot be answered, but they matter because they bring the men back into the case as human beings, not abstract figures in a theory. When people discuss this case online, they often focus on the strangeness, the missing keys, the clean undercarriage, the window down, the unused fireplace, the unopened food locker, Gary's shoes, the gold watch, the red pickup, the lights going out. All of those details matter. They are the reason the case endures. But if we look only at the strange details, we may lose sight of the slower, sadder fact underneath them. 5 vulnerable men entered a situation they were not prepared for, and one by one, the cold took them. Whatever mystery surrounds the path to that outcome, the outcome itself was brutally simple. Exposure, starvation, isolation, no rescue in time. The mountains did not need to be malicious. They only needed to be cold. Still, the evidence does not let us settle fully into a simple lost-in-the-woods story. The Joseph Sean sighting keeps pulling us back. Imagine that night from his perspective again. He is in his own disabled car, about 150 feet from the place where the mercury would later be found. He is in pain. He believes something is wrong with his heart. The engine is running because he needs heat. Outside, the road is dark and snowbound. Hours pass. Then headlights appear. To someone alone in distress, headlights should mean relief. A car means people. People mean help. Help means survival, he calls out, and the lights go off. The voices stop. That is the part of his story that feels almost dreamlike, because it has the logic of a nightmare. Help appears, and when asked to help, disappears into silence. If the people near him were the Yuba County Five, there are several possible interpretations. Maybe they were scared by a voice they could not place. Maybe they thought the voice belonged to someone dangerous. Maybe they were already being guided or controlled by someone else. Maybe they did not hear him clearly. Maybe only 1 or 2 of them heard him, and the rest did not understand what was happening. Maybe Sean's, in pain and fear, misread what he saw. Maybe the people were not the 5 men at all. Each possibility changes the case. If they were scared, the case becomes a tragedy of fear and misunderstanding. If they did not hear him, it becomes a tragedy of proximity, help just out of reach. If someone else was with them, the case becomes darker. If Sean's was wrong, then one of the most haunting details in the case becomes a painful coincidence created by illness and night. The difficulty is that none of these possibilities can be confirmed. Doctors confirmed that Sean's had suffered a mild heart attack, which supports the core of his account. He really was there, he really was in distress, and he really did make his way down the road afterward. But pain can distort perception, fear can distort memory, darkness can turn shapes into people, people into shadows, shadows into memories that feel real because the fear was real. So the responsible way to hold the Sean's account is gently, with both openness and caution. It may be a crucial clue. It may be a partial clue. It may be a mistaken memory attached to a real ordeal. We do not know. The Brownsville sighting has the same quality, though in a different form. A store clerk and owner say they saw men who resembled members of the group arriving in a red pickup truck the day after the disappearance. Police considered the witness credible. Family members recognized behavioral details that seemed to match Ted and Jack. That is not nothing. But the sighting creates more questions than it answers. If 4 of the men were alive in Brownsville, how did they get there? Who was driving the red pickup truck? Where was Gary? Why did no one call home? Why would men who had prepared for an important tournament act as if the tournament did not exist? Why would they remain in the foothills rather than return to the valley? And if they were alive and mobile on February 25th, how did the later pattern of remains fit with that sighting? The red pickup truck never becomes a solved object. It appears in the case like a passing figure in fog, visible for a moment and then gone. For families, sightings can be both a gift and a cruelty. A sighting says they may still be alive. A sighting says someone saw them after the moment everyone feared. A sighting says there may still be time. But if the sighting cannot be resolved, it leaves the family suspended between hope and dread. It prevents the mind from resting. It creates a second timeline, a possible timeline running beside the official one. Maybe they were alive, maybe they were in a truck, maybe someone helped them, maybe someone harmed them, maybe Gary was elsewhere, maybe the witness was mistaken. Those maybes can last a lifetime. Then there is the search itself. Searches in winter mountains are not like searches in fields or neighborhoods. Weather dictates what is possible. Snow covers tracks. Snow hides objects. Storms erase signs that may have been visible for only a short time. Searchers can become endangered. Vehicles can become stuck. Whiteout conditions can make even trained people lose their way. When searchers and snowcats nearly became lost themselves, that tells us something important about the environment. It tells us that the mountain was not merely inconvenient. It was dangerous even to people who came prepared, using equipment designed for the conditions. The families may have wanted every inch searched immediately. Any family would. But the mountain did not care about urgency. It held its snow, it kept its secrets under drifts, it forced the search to wait. That waiting is one of the cruelest parts of this case. From late February to early June, the families lived without answers while the evidence lay hidden in the forest. The mercury had been found, but the men had not. The car was proof they had been in the mountains, but not proof of what happened next. The sightings suggested possibilities, but not certainty. The weather prevented resolution. Every day must have carried the same questions. Will today be the day someone finds them? Will today be the day the phone rings? Will today be the day a witness remembers something? Will today be the day hope ends? And then, in June, hope did not end all at once. It ended in pieces, first Ted, then Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, then Jack Hewitt, still no Gary. Even the discovery phase refused to give a complete answer. The trailer is the center of that incompleteness. Let us sit with the trailer a little longer because it is the place where the case becomes hardest to hold. A locked Forest Service trailer in a remote campsite is not a home. It is not meant to be a refuge for lost travelers, but in that winter, for at least some of the men, it became the closest thing to shelter they found. The front window was broken. That suggests urgency, or at least necessity. Someone needed in. Someone was willing to break glass to enter. That act alone tells us that whoever reached the trailer understood, at least at that moment, that survival required crossing a boundary. They were willing to break into a government structure because the alternative was staying outside in the cold, and yet once inside, other boundaries seemed not to have been crossed. The fireplace was not used. The butane heat was not used. The heavy clothes were not used. The larger food supply was not opened. That pattern is what makes the trailer feel so impossible. The men were desperate enough to break a window, but not desperate enough or not able enough to use the supplies that could have saved them. How can both things be true? One answer may be that the men did not know what was available. A person in crisis does not always search thoroughly. If they found the sea rations first, those cans may have become the only food they understood. If the dehydrated food was in a locker, perhaps the locker seemed off limits, locked, official, not meant for them. If the butane valve was outside or unfamiliar, perhaps they did not recognize its purpose. Another answer may be that they knew, but were afraid. Fear of authority can be powerful, especially for people who have spent their lives being told to obey rules. If Ted, Jack, Bill, and Jack Hewitt had been taught that taking things that do not belong to them was wrong, that lesson may have remained powerful even when survival was at stake. Gary, with his Army background and his history with institutions, may have had his own reasons to fear getting in trouble. It is easy to say from the outside that survival should override rules. But human beings do not always work that way. People sometimes freeze in emergencies. They sometimes cling to familiar rules because the situation around them is too frightening to interpret. They sometimes wait for permission that never comes. A third answer may be that Gary's illness returned in the absence of medication. Schizophrenia can change perception. It can make ordinary objects feel threatening. It can make decisions that seem obvious to others feel dangerous. If Gary became paranoid, the chimney smoke might have seemed like a signal that would bring punishment. The butane system might have seemed unsafe. The food locker might have seemed forbidden, contaminated, or somehow connected to danger. This is not to blame Gary. It is to recognize that untreated mental illness in an isolated survival situation could have made every decision harder. And if Ted was dependent on Gary for decisions, then Gary's confusion could have affected both of them. The sheets over Ted's body are one of the saddest details in the case. Someone covered him. That suggests care. It suggests that Ted did not simply die unnoticed. It suggests that whoever was with him, likely Gary, recognized his death or believed he had died and responded with an act that was tender, ritualistic, human. Covering the dead is a way of acknowledging personhood. It is a way of saying, you are not just a body, you are someone. You deserve to be covered. You deserve dignity. So even inside the confusion of the trailer, there may have been love. Gary may have been ill. He may have been confused. He may have failed to use the supplies. But if he covered Ted, then he did something deeply human at the end. That is why it is important not to turn Gary into a villain in this story. Some theories place too much weight on him because he had schizophrenia, because he was one of the two drivers, because he vanished, because his shoes were found in the trailer. People sometimes make him the explanation for everything. But mental illness is not a motive. A diagnosis is not a confession. Gary was described by doctors as stable and successful in treatment. His family and friends knew him as a person, not a symptom. There is no evidence that he harmed his friends. There is no evidence that he deliberately led them to their deaths. What we can say is that his mental health may have become relevant after the group was stranded, especially if he lost access to medication. That is a careful statement. Anything beyond that becomes speculation. The shoes are another detail that invites speculation. Gary's tennis shoes were found in the trailer. Ted was missing his own shoes. One theory is that Gary, whose feet may have been swollen from frostbite, put on Ted's shoes before leaving. Another is that Gary gave his shoes to Ted or removed them for some other reason. Another is that the shoe exchange happened earlier in confusion or necessity. Whatever happened, the shoes tell us that Gary was there. They are the last confirmed physical trace of him. After that, he becomes absence. A man leaves the trailer, or is taken from it, or dies nearby and is never found. His body does not appear in the thaw. His remains do not turn up in later searches. His name stays on missing person lists. His photograph stays young. That kind of absence changes a case. If Gary had been found near the trailer, the official explanation might feel more complete, even if questions remained, but because he was not found, the story never fully closes. There is always the possibility that he walked farther, that he encountered someone, that he survived longer, that he disappeared into terrain too dense and remote to give him back. Forests can keep remains hidden for a very long time. Animals scatter bones. Snowmelt moves objects. Vegetation grows. Searchers can pass within feet of something and not see it. A human body, especially after months in wilderness, can become difficult to locate even in areas that have been searched. So Gary's absence does not prove foul play. But it keeps the door open to uncertainty. The theories can be grouped gently into a few broad categories. The first is the wrong turn theory. Under this explanation, the men left Chico, perhaps intending to visit Gary's friends in Forbestown, and made a navigational error near Oroville. They ended up on Oroville-Quincy Road without fully understanding where it led. They continued driving because they expected the road to eventually connect them to somewhere familiar. By the time they realized something was wrong, they were in the mountains, in snow, and the car became stuck. This theory has strengths. It explains why they might be on a road that did not lead home. It does not require a criminal encounter. It accounts for the vulnerability of the group and the difficulty of navigating unfamiliar roads at night. It also fits with the later idea that they followed snowcat tracks toward the trailer because they believed the tracks would lead to help, but it has weaknesses. It does not easily explain why the car was driven so carefully that the undercarriage remained clean. It does not explain why they continued so far into the mountains without turning around. It does not explain why Jack, who did not like cold weather and was careful with his car, would keep driving on a rough mountain road. It does not explain the missing keys or the unlocked window. The second broad theory is the voluntary detour theory. Under this explanation, the men did not simply get lost. They chose to go somewhere after the game. Perhaps they intended to visit Gary's friends. Perhaps they wanted to extend the evening. Perhaps someone suggested a destination that seemed reasonable at first. The wrong turn may have come later, after the choice to deviate from the direct route home. This theory accounts for the fact that they were far from the normal route. It allows for a decision that made sense in the moment but became dangerous over time. But it still does not explain why they would risk being late for their tournament the next morning, something they had clearly cared about. It does not explain why they would go into the mountains dressed so lightly. It does not explain why they did not turn back once the road became unfamiliar and snowy. The third theory is that someone else influenced them. This could mean they followed another vehicle. It could mean someone asked for help. It could mean they were invited somewhere. It could mean they were pressured or threatened. It could mean they encountered a person who knew the road and somehow caused them to continue. This theory draws strength from the clean undercarriage, the possibility that a more experienced driver was involved, the Schoen's account, the red pickup sighting, and the unexplained missing keys. But it has a serious limitation. No such person has ever been identified. There is no confirmed suspect, no confession, no physical evidence tying an outsider to the car or the trailer. A theory can explain some odd details and still remain unsupported. The fourth theory is that the group experienced a chain of small mistakes that became fatal. This may be the most human explanation, because many tragedies do not begin with one dramatic event. They begin with a small choice, followed by another, followed by another. A decision to stop after the game, a decision to take a different route, a missed turn, a belief that the road would lead somewhere useful. A reluctance to admit they were lost, a car stuck in snow, a decision to walk, a decision to follow tracks, a decision not to use a fireplace, a decision not to open a locker. Each choice may have seemed understandable in the moment. Together, they led to disaster. This kind of explanation is unsatisfying because it does not give us a villain. It does not make the strange details vanish. But real life is often made of accumulation. People die not because of one impossible thing, but because several ordinary things line up in the worst possible order. Still, even the chain of mistakes theory leaves the case with its shadows. The keys, the undercarriage, the red pickup, the lights, the watch, Gary, these details remain. A responsible telling of this case has to let them remain. It is tempting to force a conclusion, especially in a long story. The mind wants completion. It wants to say, this is what happened. It wants to close the file. It wants the final paragraph to explain the first one, but not every case gives us that. Sometimes the most honest ending is uncertainty, and uncertainty can be difficult to live with. For investigators, uncertainty means a case remains open, at least in principle. It means there is always the possibility of a new lead, a new piece of evidence, a new witness remembering something, a body found by hunters or hikers or forestry workers, a forgotten report rediscovered in a file. For families, uncertainty is more personal. It is the empty chair that never becomes less empty. It is the grave that may not exist. It is the question asked at night when the house is quiet. Did he suffer? Was he alone? Did someone help him? Did someone hurt him? Did he know we were looking? Could something have been done differently? Those questions are not academic. They do not belong to podcasts or message boards. They belonged first to mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, people who remembered the sound of these men's voices, the way they moved through a room, the foods they liked, the habits that made them recognizable. That is why the word mystery can feel too small. A mystery is something to solve. A tragedy is something to mourn. The Yuba County Five is both, but if we forget the tragedy, the mystery becomes hollow. So let us return, one by one, not to the clues, but to the lives. Gary Mathias was more than the missing fifth man. He was a veteran who had come home changed and fought his way toward stability. He worked in his stepfather's gardening business. He had doctors who believed he was doing well. He had friends who trusted him. He had a future that was not guaranteed, but was possible. His disappearance froze him in public memory at 25, but his family would have remembered him as a whole person, with childhood struggles, progress, humor, habits, and hopes. Ted Waher was more than the man in the trailer. He was the oldest of the group, a trusting person who valued routine and work and food and friendship. The stories about him are often repeated because they help explain the case, but they also risk reducing him to his vulnerability. Ted was not simply someone who lacked common sense. He was someone deeply loved, someone whose way of seeing the world was different, someone who deserved protection and dignity. The fact that he survived so long in that trailer is not only baffling, it is also evidence of endurance. Jack Madruga was more than the owner of the Mercury. He was a son, a veteran, a careful car owner, a driver for his friends. The clean car and the missing keys matter because the car mattered to him. It represented independence. It represented responsibility. When investigators found it unlocked and abandoned, his family did not see only a clue. They saw something that violated what they knew about Jack. Jack Hewitt was more than the quiet youngest man. He was a person who found comfort in companionship, especially with Ted. He disliked the phone so much that his brother managed calls for him. That detail becomes important in the Brownsville sighting, but it is also simply human. Everyone has ways of avoiding discomfort. Everyone has habits that family members know immediately. For Jack, the telephone was one of those things. For his family, that memory became part of how they tried to understand whether a witness had truly seen him. Bill Sterling was more than the man found near Jack Madruga. He was someone who knew he did not like the mountains. He had been there before and preferred not to return. That makes his death in that landscape especially painful. The place where he died was a place he had already chosen against. Yet somehow on that February night he was brought there anyway. These lives intersected through sport. That matters too. Sports gave the five men a shared identity that was not based on limitation. On the court they could be teammates, they could compete, they could practice, they could win. They could look forward to a tournament and a possible trip to Los Angeles. They could prepare uniforms and ask to be woken up on time. They could belong to something. The tragedy is sharpened by the fact that they disappeared on the eve of that tournament. They were not drifting aimlessly. They had plans, they had somewhere to be, they had something they wanted that makes the wrong road feel even more wrong. A person with nowhere to be might keep driving for the sake of driving, but these men had a reason to go home. Their own game was waiting. Their team was waiting. Their families were expecting them. So when we ask why they went into the mountains, we are really asking why something became more powerful than all of that. More powerful than the tournament, more powerful than routine, more powerful than Jack Madruga's reluctance to drive in cold mountain conditions, more powerful than Bill Sterling's dislike of the area, more powerful than the simple desire to go home. Was it confusion? Was it a mistake? Was it persuasion? Was it fear? Was it someone else? We do not know. The case sits at the intersection of vulnerability and wilderness. That is part of why it stays with people. Many true crime stories center on malice, on one person deliberately harming another. This story may involve malice, but it may not. It may be a story about environment, misunderstanding, disability, weather, and chance. It may be a story where the most dangerous force was not a person, but a sequence of conditions no one was equipped to survive. That ambiguity makes it hard to categorize. If it was an accident, it is a deeply strange accident. If it was foul play, it is a crime without a known offender. If it was both, a strange accident shaped by an encounter with someone else, then the truth may be even more complicated than any single theory. And because the truth is missing, the case becomes a mirror. People see different things in it depending on which details they trust most. Some see the car and think someone else was involved. Some see the snowcat tracks and think they followed the only sign of help. Some see the trailer and think cognitive disability and mental illness explain the unused supplies. Some see the trailer and think, no, something else must have been happening. Some see Gary's disappearance and think he wandered away and died. Some see Gary's disappearance and think he survived or was taken or met someone. The case permits all of these thoughts because it refuses to close them down. That is why care matters. When a case is open-ended, speculation can grow wildly. It can become detached from the people at the center. It can turn into entertainment, into argument, into a contest over who has the most dramatic theory. But a gentle telling asks us to keep returning to the ground. The ground is the known record. 5 men went to Chico. They were last confirmed at Bears Market. Their car was found in snow on Oroville-Quincy Road. 4 bodies were found after the thaw. Gary Mathias was not found. The trailer contained unused resources. The rest is uncertainty. There is peace of a kind in accepting the boundary of what is known. Not peace for the families, perhaps. Not the peace they deserved, but peace for the telling. We do not have to solve what cannot be solved tonight. We do not have to force the evidence into a shape it does not naturally hold. We can let the strange details remain strange. We can let the unanswered questions remain unanswered, and we can remember that the absence of an answer is itself part of the story. In the decades since 1978, the world has changed around this case. Roads have changed, technology has changed, search methods have changed, true crime culture has changed. If the same disappearance happened today, there might be cell phone records, surveillance cameras, GPS data, digital receipts, dash cameras, social media posts, and emergency alerts. The route might be reconstructed minute by minute. The car might be tracked. A phone might ping. A purchase might be time-stamped electronically. Searchers might use drones, thermal imaging, and modern mapping. But in 1978, the case depended on human memory, paper maps, witness statements, physical searches, newspaper coverage, and the slow movement of information from one person to another. That slower world shaped the mystery. The clerk remembered the men because they annoyed her near closing. The ranger remembered the car only after seeing a bulletin. Sean's came forward after media coverage. The Brownsville witness contacted police after seeing flyers. Every lead depended on someone noticing, remembering, and speaking. And memory is fragile. It can be accurate. It can be incomplete. It can be influenced by fear, pain, time, and expectation. That does not mean witnesses should be dismissed. It means witness accounts must be held carefully, especially when they carry so much weight. The Yuba County Five case is in many ways a case made of fragments. A market receipt or the memory of a market clerk. A car in snow, wrappers and cartons, a folded map, missing keys, a ranger's delayed recognition, a man in pain seeing lights, a store sighting in Brownsville, a broken window, C-ration cans, unused heat, a gold watch, tennis shoes, blankets and a rusted flashlight found near the road, 4 bodies, 1 missing man. Fragments can suggest a story, but they do not always complete one. The rusted flashlight and Forest Service blankets found about a quarter-mile northwest of the trailer are a good example. Searchers found them near the road, but could not determine how long they had been there. If they belonged to the men, they might indicate movement away from the trailer. They might mark a route Gary took. They might be connected to someone else. But because their age and ownership were uncertain, they remain only possible clues. The same is true of the gold watch on the table near Ted. His family said it was not his. That makes it intriguing. But without knowing whose watch it was or how it got there, it cannot carry the weight of a conclusion. Unsolved cases often contain details like this. Details that feel important because they do not fit cleanly, but cannot be made to speak. The danger is that we may ask them to say more than they can. A watch can say, "Someone left me here." It cannot say who. A flashlight can say, "Someone may have carried me." It cannot say when. A missing key can say, "Someone took me." It cannot say why. A clean undercarriage can say, "The car was driven carefully," or on a path that did not scrape it. It cannot say who drove. This is the discipline of a careful case telling. Let evidence speak, but do not make it sing beyond its range. The families, of course, had to interpret all of this in a much more painful way. For them, every object had emotional force. The car was Jack Madruga's car. The ring with Ted's name was Ted's ring. The shoes were Gary's shoes. The jeans near the bush helped identify Jack Hewitt. The remains of Bill Sterling were not a symbol of the mystery, but the physical proof that his father would never bring him home alive. Objects in an investigation are evidence. Objects in a family are memory. That is another reason the case deserves a quiet voice. There is no need to make it more dramatic. The facts are already heavy enough. The families lived through the drama. Everyone else should approach with restraint. There is another way to understand this story, and that is to think of it as a map with certain places illuminated and the spaces between them left dark. Marysville and Yuba City are illuminated. Chico is illuminated. Bears Market is illuminated. Oroville-Quincy Road is illuminated. The place where the mercury was found is illuminated. The lodge Joseph Shawns eventually reached is illuminated. Brownsville is illuminated, but only dimly, because the sighting there remains unresolved. The Forest Service trailer is illuminated. The places where Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt were found are illuminated. And then there are the dark spaces between. The road between Chico and the mountains. The moment the men left the expected route. The decision to keep driving, the moment the car stopped. The reason the keys disappeared. The first steps away from the mercury, the long walk through snow. The moment one man could go no farther. The moment another stayed beside him. The moment Ted and Gary, if that is what happened, reached the trailer, the days inside, the hunger, the cold, the final decision Gary made, if he was the one who left. Those spaces remain dark. A case like this teaches us that a timeline can be both detailed and incomplete. We can know dates, distances, objects, weather, and discovery points. We can know that the car was 70 miles from Chico. We can know that the trailer was about 19.4 miles from the car. We can know that Madruga and Sterling were found about 11.4 miles from the car on opposite sides of the road. We can know that Hewitt was found about 2 miles northeast of the trailer. We can know that blankets and a flashlight were found about a quarter mile northwest of the trailer. Those numbers sound precise, but precision is not the same as explanation. A distance tells us how far someone traveled. It does not tell us what they believed while traveling. A body location tells us where a life ended. It does not tell us every step that came before. A broken window tells us someone entered. It does not tell us what they were thinking as the glass broke. This is why the case feels both documented and unknowable. It has enough facts to keep us returning, but not enough facts to bring us peace. The geography itself becomes part of the mystery. If the men were trying to return home, they moved away from home. If they were trying to find help, they passed or failed to return toward places that might have offered help. If they followed snowcat tracks, they may have done something logical that led them deeper into danger. If they were following someone else, then the geography may have been shaped by another person's knowledge or intention. Every route suggests a different story. A wrong route suggests confusion. A chosen route suggests intention. A forced route suggests fear. A followed route suggests trust. And without a survivor, we cannot know which kind of route it was. Think, too, about the difference between official knowledge and family knowledge. Official knowledge is built from evidence. It asks what can be documented, what can be verified, what can be put in a report. Family knowledge is different. It is built from years of living with someone. Jack would not leave his car like that. Ted would not ignore a cry for help. Bill did not like the mountains. Jack Hewitt hated the telephone. Gary was doing well. These statements are not forensic evidence in the usual sense, but they matter. Families know patterns. They know habits. They know what feels consistent and what feels wrong. When a loved one behaves in a way that contradicts those patterns, families notice. The difficulty is that crisis can make people act out of character. A careful man may leave a window down if he is frightened. A helpful man may fail to help if he is confused. A person who dislikes the mountains may end up there through a series of choices he did not control. A man stable in treatment may become unstable if separated from medication. So family knowledge is powerful, but it does not always solve the contradiction. It tells us why certain details feel wrong. It does not always tell us how they became wrong. That tension runs through the whole case. The families knew the men. The evidence showed something that did not fit. And no explanation has ever fully joined those two truths. The case also asks us to think about disability and vulnerability with care. The 5 men were adults. They had agency. They made choices. They attended games, played basketball, worked, drove, socialized, and lived lives that were meaningful and real. At the same time, they had cognitive and psychiatric challenges that could make certain situations more dangerous. A person can be capable in familiar routines and still vulnerable in unfamiliar emergencies. A person can function well at home and still become overwhelmed in a dark, freezing forest. A person can understand rules in ordinary life and misapply those rules when survival requires improvisation. That distinction matters. We should not speak of the men as helpless children. We should not strip them of adulthood. But we also should not ignore the support structures that help them navigate daily life. They lived with parents. They had routines. They had familiar places. They had a team. They had each other. When those familiar supports vanished, when the road became unfamiliar and the weather became dangerous, their vulnerabilities may have mattered more. That is not sensational. It is human. Every person has conditions under which they function well and conditions under which they struggle. For the Yuba County Five, the mountain road in winter may have been the worst possible environment: cold, dark, remote, ruleless, and unfamiliar. The ordinary tools of their lives did not apply there. There was no parent to wake them up, no coach to call the next play, no clear sign telling them what to do, no familiar street leading home, only snow, road, trees, and night. And later, inside the trailer, even when shelter existed, the ordinary rules may still have failed them. A locked government trailer is not a simple place. It has systems, supplies, storage areas, a fireplace, a heating setup, a butane tank, sea rations, dehydrated food, heavy clothing. To someone trained or calm, it might be a survival shelter. To someone frightened, injured, hungry, cognitively overwhelmed, or mentally ill, it might be a confusing collection of things that could not be used without permission or understanding. This does not make the trailer less tragic. It makes it more tragic, because survival was close, but not accessible in the way it needed to be. Food existed, but not all food was eaten. Heat existed, but was not turned on. Warm clothing existed, but was not worn. Shelter existed, but did not save Ted. That is a particular kind of horror. Not the absence of resources, but the failure to connect human need with the resources that could meet it. The trailer was full of almost enough food, almost enough heat, almost enough shelter, almost enough time, almost rescue, but almost was not enough. When we think about Ted surviving for weeks, perhaps more than 3 months, the story slows into something almost unbearable. Not because of gore or violence, but because of duration. A sudden death is one kind of tragedy. A long survival that ends in starvation is another. It means there were days, morning light through the window, night after night of cold, cans opened one by one, candles burned partly down, the body weakening slowly, feet damaged beyond healing, hope rising and falling, perhaps sounds outside that were only wind, perhaps the expectation that someone would come, perhaps the fear that no one would. We do not know what Ted understood. We do not know what Gary understood. We do not know whether Ted knew how long he had been there, whether he expected help, whether he knew his friends were gone, whether he spoke with Gary, whether they comforted each other, whether they waited. We only know that he endured, and then he died in a place that should have saved him. That sentence is the emotional center of the trailer. He died in a place that should have saved him. Gary's final unknown movement is the other center. If Gary left the trailer after Ted died, why did he leave? Was he trying to get help? Was he disoriented? Was he afraid of being found there? Was he following something he believed he saw or heard? Was he wearing Ted's shoes because his own feet were too swollen? Or because Ted no longer needed them? Or for reasons we cannot understand? Did he die nearby, hidden by terrain and time? Did he make it farther than anyone imagined? Those questions have followed his name for decades. In many missing person cases, the missing person becomes a symbol of uncertainty. Gary has become that in this case, but he was also a person who may have lived through the most terrifying final chapter of all 5 men. If he reached the trailer, if he stayed with Ted, if he watched Ted weaken and die, and if he then walked out alone, his final days or hours were likely marked by exhaustion, cold, grief, confusion, or illness. His absence should not make him less mourned. It should make him more gently remembered. There is a phrase that often appears in unsolved cases: someone knows something. It is a hopeful phrase. It suggests that the truth exists somewhere in human memory, that if the right person speaks, the case can be solved. In some cases, that is true. A witness remains silent. A perpetrator confesses. A family secret emerges. A forgotten report is found. But in some cases, perhaps no living person knows the full truth. Perhaps the only people who knew what happened on Oroville-Quincy Road were the 5 men themselves, and 4 of them died, while the 5th vanished. Perhaps the truth is not hidden by a person, but lost to weather, time, and death. That possibility is hard to accept. It means the case may never have the kind of ending people want. It means there may be no final witness, no recovered confession, no clear solution. It means the best we can do is preserve the facts accurately and remember the men kindly. And that is enough for a quiet telling. Not enough for justice. If injustice occurred, not enough for closure, if closure is still desired, but enough for remembrance. Before that simpler shape settles, there is one last set of details worth holding together, because they show why this case has never rested easily. The Mercury Montego says one thing, the trailer says another, the sightings say another, the bodies say another, and Gary's absence says something else entirely. The Mercury suggests interruption. It was functional, it had gasoline, it was not deeply trapped. It was found unlocked with a window down, keys missing, and food wrappers inside. It was not a wreck, it was not a burned-out shell. It was a working car left behind in a place it should not have been. The trailer suggests survival, but survival that failed in a way that seems almost impossible. A person or persons reached shelter, they entered it by force, they ate some food, they stayed long enough for Ted to waste away, yet other supplies were left unused, as if the knowledge or permission needed to use them was missing. The sightings suggest movement and company. Sean saw or believed he saw people and lights near the abandoned car location. The Brownsville witnesses believed they saw men matching members of the group in a red pickup truck. Neither sighting can be proven, but neither has disappeared from the case because both contain details that seem too important to ignore. The bodies suggest a terrible walk. Madruga and Sterling found near the road. Hewitt found beyond the trailer. Ted inside the trailer. Their locations sketch a path through snow and exhaustion, a path where the group separated, slowed, and finally broke apart. And Gary's absence prevents the final line from being drawn. If all 5 men had been found, the case might still be strange, but it would be more contained. Instead, one man remains outside the known ending. The last confirmed sign of him is not a body, not a grave, not a death certificate built on recovered remains, but a pair of tennis shoes in a Forest Service trailer. That is why the case feels unfinished. It is unfinished, not in the sense that no one knows anything, but in the sense that the available facts do not complete the human story. There is also the matter of time. The case did not unfold in a single night from the perspective of the families. It unfolded over months. First, the men were simply late. Then they were missing. Then the car was found. Then the weather stopped the search. Then witnesses came forward. Then nothing happened for a long while except waiting. Then the thaw came. Then the discoveries came one after another. That slow unfolding matters because grief arrived in stages. On the first morning, there may have been worry mixed with irritation. Where are they? Why are they not home? They know they have a game. By the afternoon, worry would have deepened. Something is wrong. When the police became involved, fear would have taken shape. When the car was found in the mountains, fear would have become confusion. Why there? Why that road? Where are they? When the search was called off because of weather, fear would have become helplessness. When witnesses came forward, helplessness may have been mixed with hope. Maybe they were alive. Maybe someone saw them. Maybe they were in a truck. Maybe Gary was somewhere else. Then spring came and hope had to survive without evidence. And then June brought answers no one wanted. That is not a single shock. It is a prolonged ordeal. For families, prolonged uncertainty changes the way time feels. Every phone call matters. Every knock at the door matters. Every rumor matters. Hope becomes something painful because it has to be protected and feared at the same time. If you give up hope, you may feel you are abandoning the person you love. If you keep hope, you may be injured again and again. The Yuba County families lived inside that tension. This is one reason the story should be told slowly. A fast telling can make the case feel like a list of oddities. A slow telling allows room for the waiting. The waiting was part of what happened. It also allows room for humility. Humility is important in this case. No one listening now was in that car. No one listening now walked that road with them. No one listening now sat in that trailer with Ted and Gary. If Gary was there, it is easy to look backward and say what should have happened. They should have stayed with the car, they should have pushed it out, they should have turned back, they should have used the fireplace, they should have opened the food locker, they should have turned on the heat. They should have called from Brownsville if they were there. But the word should belongs to people who know the ending. The men did not. They were inside the event, not outside it, And inside an event, especially an emergency, the right choice may not appear as clearly as it does later. That does not erase the mystery. It simply softens our judgment. Instead of asking, how could they fail to do the obvious thing, we can ask a gentler question. What made the obvious thing unavailable to them? Was it fear, confusion, cold, disability, mental illness, a misunderstanding of rules, a belief that help was ahead, the influence of another person, some combination of all of these? That question may not solve the case, but it brings compassion into the center of it. And compassion is necessary here, because the 5 men were vulnerable, and vulnerability should not be treated as spectacle. Their disabilities and mental health conditions are relevant because they may help explain decisions, but they should never be used to make them seem less human, less adult, or less worthy of respect. They were men, they had preferences, they had routines, they had friendships, they had families who knew them deeply, they had a team. They had plans. And they had the right to be remembered for more than the mystery of their deaths. So as the story becomes quieter now, we let the details settle without forcing them. The Mercury stays on the snowy road. The map stays folded. The keys remain missing. The undercarriage remains strangely clean. Joseph Shawns remains in his car calling into the dark. The lights remain uncertain. The Brownsville store remains a possible glimpse. The red pickup remains unidentified. The snow remains deep enough to stop a search. The trailer remains full of contradictions. Ted remains covered in sheets. Gary's shoes remain behind. Gary himself remains missing. And the 5 names remain, which is the most important thing left to carry. There is one final comfort in a story without an answer, and it is not the comfort of certainty. It is the comfort of careful memory. Careful memory does not solve the road. It does not find the keys. It does not open the food locker in time. It does not bring Gary home. But careful memory refuses to let the men become only a headline, only an internet mystery, only a comparison to another case in another country. It keeps them close to the ordinary world they came from. A valley, a team, a family table, a car, a game, a Friday night. That ordinary world is important because it was theirs before the mystery was ours. They belonged to people before they belonged to history. They were missed before they were studied. They were loved before they were named in articles, books, podcasts, and documentaries. And in a quiet telling, that order should be restored. First the men, then the mystery. First the lives, then the evidence. First the families, then the theories. That is how we keep the story human, and perhaps that is the quiet responsibility of any telling like this. Not to solve what cannot honestly be solved, and not to pretend certainty where the record offers only fragments, but to preserve the fragments with care. To say that these men mattered before the road, before the snow, before the trailer, before the theories. To say that the unanswered questions are real, but so were the lives behind them. To let the unknown remain unknown without letting the people disappear inside it. And to remember that a quiet story can still be a complete act of respect, even when the case itself remains incomplete. The mystery may be what brings listeners to the story, but memory is what should remain after the mystery has gone quiet. If you are listening now, perhaps half awake, perhaps letting the rain blend with the words, you do not need to hold every detail in your mind. You can let the case settle into a simpler shape. 5 friends, a basketball game, a market near closing, a car on a mountain road, snow, a search that could not continue, a witness calling from the dark, a possible sighting in a small town, a trailer with food and heat left unused, 4 men found, 1 still missing. That is the shape. The unanswered questions are part of the shape too. Why did they drive there? Why did they leave the car? Why did they walk forward instead of back? Why did Ted starve near food? Why did Gary disappear? We can ask those questions without pretending we can answer them. Sometimes asking with care is the only honest thing left. The rain continues to fall outside the window. The world is quiet. The night is dark and steady, the kind of night that wraps itself around everything and holds it still. Inside, we are warm. We have shelter. We have comfort. We have the privilege of hearing this story from a place of safety, from a distance of time and space. The 5 men of the Yuba County Five did not have that privilege. They had a Friday night in February. They had a basketball game. They had snacks from a market. They had a car full of friends. They had each other. and they had a road that led them somewhere they never meant to go. We cannot change what happened to them. We cannot solve the mystery that has resisted every attempt at solution. But we can remember them. We can say their names. Gary Mathias, Ted Waher, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling, 5 friends from Yuba County, California, 1 car, 1 snowy road. One case that remains open, decade after decade, waiting for answers that may never come. There is a quiet dignity in acknowledging that uncertainty. Not every story is meant to be solved. Some stories are meant to be carried, held gently, and remembered. The Yuba County Five is one of those stories. So tonight, as the rain falls and the room grows quiet, we leave the 5 men where they have rested for more than 40 years, in the cold, in the mystery, in the memory of those who loved them. Gary Mathias, Ted Waher, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling, may the telling be gentle, may the memory hold, and if there is anything to carry forward from this long, quiet road, maybe it is this: that people are never only the mystery that surrounds them. They are not only the last place they were seen, they are not only the strange detail, the abandoned car, the unanswered question, the headline that returns every few years when someone new discovers the case and wonders what could have happened. They were sons, they were friends, they were teammates. They were men who loved basketball, who made plans for the next morning, who expected to go home, sleep in familiar rooms, wake up, put on uniforms, and play another game together. That ordinary expectation is part of what makes the story linger. Not because it is loud, but because it is so quiet. Because one night the path home changed. Because a road in the mountains held on to its secret. Because the snow came down, and the years followed, and still the question remained. So we leave them now with care. Not solved, not forgotten, held gently in the rain. May the rain carry us softly into the dark,